The demand came not from some shadowy criminal under cover of darkness, but from a police officer in broad daylight, his service weapon pressed hard against the temple of a man standing on his own front porch. "Get on your knees and put your hands behind your head, or I'll blow your brains all over this perfect lawn." That was not a request for a license or registration. It was a demand for a $1,000 community protection fee, paid to keep breathing. The man paid. A cold, calculated stillness settled over him as the officer walked away, satisfied and triumphant. That officer had no idea he had not just shaken down an ordinary citizen. He had declared war on the United States Army itself. Have you ever watched a bully finally get what was coming to him? Where were you when it happened? Tell us in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. You will not want to miss the epic fall that follows. Morning light poured across the manicured lawns of Oak Creek Estates, a neighborhood where silence itself felt like a statement, broken only by the soft hum of electric mowers and the distant laughter of children in carefully kept backyards. To Officer Wade Harlan, that silence was the sound of order, his order. From his own perfectly edged yard, he watched the massive moving truck across the street. It was an unwanted intrusion, a stain on the otherwise flawless canvas of his community. He took a long sip of coffee. The bitterness on his tongue matched the bitterness in his gut. The family moving in was black. It was not merely the color of their skin that unsettled him. It was the man's bearing, tall, powerfully built, moving with a quiet economy that made Harlan's instincts scream. He wore a plain olive-green t-shirt of the kind Harlan associated with military surplus stores, and cargo pants. He did not look like he belonged. People like him did not live in houses that cost more than $1 million. They did not drive the sleek black pickup now parked in the driveway. In his 36 years of life and 12 years on the force, Harlan had developed a sharp sense for anything out of place. This man in this neighborhood was a blaring siren. "Something's not right," he muttered, setting his cup on the porch rail. He had seen it hundreds of times. A new group arrives, settles in, and before you know it, the neighborhood starts to decline. He would not allow that here. This was his sanctuary, the place he had earned with his badge and his vigilance. He was the guardian of this community, on duty and off. It was time to set the ground rules. He unclipped his service weapon from his hip. He was never truly off duty, and tucked it into the back of his jeans, feeling the familiar cold comfort of steel against his skin. He crossed the street with deliberate purpose, his posture radiating an authority he believed was his by birthright. The man was directing the movers, pointing to a heavy-looking box. He stopped when he saw Harlan approach, his expression neutral and unreadable. "Can I help you?" he asked in a low, steady baritone that did not waver. That alone set Harlan's teeth on edge. He was used to a certain level of respect, an immediate recognition of his power, even in civilian clothes. "Wade Harlan," he said, squaring his shoulders. "I live across the street. More importantly, I'm an officer with the Oak Haven Police Department. I'm the one who keeps this neighborhood safe." He let the words hang in the air, a clear, unspoken threat. The man simply nodded. "Darius Hale. Pleasure." He offered nothing more. No explanation of his presence. No attempt to justify his existence in Harlan's perfect world. The silence grew thick and uncomfortable. Harlan felt the need to fill it, to reclaim control. "Look, Mr. Hale," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "This is a very exclusive community. We have certain standards here. People know each other. We have a system to make sure everything stays the same." He looked Hale up and down again, eyes lingering on the military-style shirt. "We don't get many renters or temporary residents." "I'm not a renter," Hale answered calmly, never looking away. "I own the house." The statement was delivered as simple fact, yet to Harlan it felt like a challenge, the sheer audacity of it. "Sure," Harlan scoffed. "Look, I'm going to need proof of residence. A deed, a utility bill, something with your name and this address on it." The demand was illegal, a flagrant overreach of authority, and he knew it. But it was a test, a way to see how far he could push, to see whether this man understood his place. Hale's expression did not change, yet a new stillness settled over him, the kind of stillness a predator carries just before it strikes. "Are you acting in an official capacity right now, Officer Harlan?" The question was precise, direct. It was not the reaction Harlan had expected. He had anticipated anger, fear, or a clumsy attempt to comply. This was different. This was analytical. "I always act in the interest of this community's safety," Harlan replied, frustration rising. "Now, are you going to show me the documents, or do we have a problem?" "We don't have a problem," Hale said, his voice dropping lower and colder. "You, however, are about to have one if you keep making illegal demands." Harlan felt a surge of rage. Who did this guy think he was? "Fine, let's try this another way," he said, stepping closer, invading Hale's personal space. "Around here, residents contribute to a community protection fund. It's a voluntary fee, of course, but everyone pays it. It guarantees a certain level of service from local law enforcement, faster response times, more frequent patrols." He smiled thinly. "Think of it as an insurance policy. They usually cover the first year." The extortion lay naked between them, raw and direct. He was daring Hale to refuse, giving him the excuse he so badly wanted. Hale's dark, unblinking eyes cut through him. Harlan had just drawn a line in the sand without realizing he stood on the wrong side of it. Darius Hale had faced men far more dangerous than Officer Wade Harlan. He had stared into the eyes of warlords in dusty, sun-scorched villages and negotiated with insurgents while the threat of hidden explosives hung in the air. Across 25 years of decorated service in the United States Army, he had learned that true power did not reside in the volume of a voice or the swagger of a walk, but in the unshakable firmness of resolve. He recognized Harlan for exactly what he was: a petty tyrant, a bully whose authority was a fragile shell built on other people's fear. And Colonel Darius Hale was not afraid. He held the officer's gaze, letting the absurd demand for a protection fee hang between them. He did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply processed the information with the same impartial analysis he would apply to an enemy's tactical position. The objective was clear. Harlan was trying to establish dominance through intimidation and illegal extortion. The proper response was equally clear: a firm, unequivocal rejection of the premise. "No," Hale said. The word was not shouted. It was not debated. It was spoken as a definitive, non-negotiable fact, as solid and immovable as the man who uttered it. Harlan's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of disbelief. He was so accustomed to his authority going unchallenged, especially in this neighborhood, that a simple one-word refusal seemed to short-circuit something inside him. "What? What did you say?" he stammered, as if he had misheard. "I said no," Hale repeated, tone unchanged. "I pay my taxes. That is my contribution to law enforcement. I will not pay you a single dollar for some invented protection fund. Furthermore, you have no legal right to demand my private documents without probable cause, and you are completely outside your jurisdiction conducting any kind of official investigation while off-duty on my private property." Each sentence landed like a hammer of logic and law, dismantling Harlan's authority piece by piece. Hale was not merely refusing, he was educating. He was establishing the precise legal boundaries Harlan had just vaulted over. The movers had paused in their work, sensing the shift in tension, their eyes darting between the two men. The air, once filled with the ordinary sounds of moving day, now crackled with confrontation. Harlan's face began to flush, a wave of red climbing his neck. He was being challenged, lectured even, by the very person he had intended to put in his place. It was an intolerable reversal. "You think you're a lawyer?" he asked with disdain, trying to regain his footing. "You think you can just roll in here with your fancy truck and your big house and act like the rules don't apply to you? Let me explain how things work in the real world." He jabbed a finger into Hale's chest. "People who cooperate, who show respect, find life a lot easier. People who want to be difficult, who want to quote the law like some jailhouse lawyer, tend to run into misunderstandings, unfortunate incidents." It was a barely veiled threat, the classic aggressive tactic of a corrupt official. Hale did not even blink. "Are you threatening me, Officer Harlan?" he asked in a voice still unnervingly calm. The question was a trap, and Harlan walked straight into it. "I'm giving you advice," he snapped, raising his volume and pitch. "I'm trying to help you understand the situation, but you're not listening. You're being arrogant, and I don't tolerate arrogance in my neighborhood." Hale took half a step back, a subtle, deliberate movement that created a clear line of demarcation on the doormat of his porch. It was a symbolic gesture, You are the intruder here. My understanding of the law is perfect, Hale said. You are committing coercion and attempted extortion under color of law. That is a federal crime. Now let me give you some advice. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Cross the street back to your house. Forget this conversation. Do not approach me or my family again. This is your only warning. The audacity was stunning. Harlan felt the blood pounding in his ears. This man was warning him, a law enforcement officer. He looked at Hale's olive green shirt, his calm, disciplined posture, and suddenly a hateful theory bloomed in his mind. He's ex-military. Thinks he's a tough guy because he did a tour or two. Thinks that gives him the right to disrespect the real authority here at home. The realization did not caution him. It enraged him further. It made the confrontation personal. This was no longer just about a new neighbor. It was about putting a supposed soldier in his place, proving who was truly in charge. I'm the only one who gives warnings around here, Harlan growled, his hand instinctively moving to the back of his jeans where the cold steel of his weapon rested. And yours just ran out. I asked for your papers and your contribution. You refused. Now you're resisting. You're obstructing. I wonder what else I'll find if I decide to take a closer look at that moving truck of yours. He smiled then, a cruel, triumphant expression. He believed he had finally found the right lever, the threat that would break this man's exasperating composure. I was wrong. He had just crossed the final line, a line that did not exist on a porch, but between a society of law and the brutal chaos of tyranny. And Darius Hale had spent his entire life defending that line. The moment Officer Harlan's hand moved toward his weapon, Colonel Hale's internal calculation shifted instantly. The situation had moved from a verbal confrontation with a corrupt cop to a direct, imminent threat to his life. His body tensed, not with fear, but with readiness. Training honed over decades in the world's most dangerous environments took control. He registered every detail: the angle of the sun, the frozen positions of the movers, the distance to his open front door. The nervous tick forming at the corner of Harlan's eye. Howe was no longer merely a homeowner. He was a soldier evaluating a hostile actor. You're making a serious mistake, officer, Hale said in a low, steady voice. One last attempt to de-escalate. But Harlan was too far gone, swept up in a surge of his own rage and wounded pride. He was a cornered animal, and the only reaction he knew was to bite. The only mistake was thinking you could talk back to me, Harlan snarled. With a swift motion, he drew the black Glock from his waistband. The click of the safety coming off was unnaturally loud on the quiet suburban street. The movers gasped. One of them dropped a box of books with a dull thud. Time seemed to stop. Harlan's face was a mask of pure fury, eyes wide and bloodshot. He was riding the high of absolute power that comes from holding a gun. He took the final step forward, closing the distance, and pressed the cold, hard barrel hard against Hale's right temple. The metal was an icy brand against his skin. I run this town, Harlan hissed, voice trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and hatred, and you're going to learn your place right now. Hale remained motionless, almost preternaturally still. His mind was a whirlwind of action and counteraction. He could disarm Harlan in less than 2 seconds. He calculated the movements: deflect the weapon, strike the throat, break the wrist. He could end the threat decisively, but he also calculated the consequences: a physical altercation, a dead or wounded officer on his lawn on his first day in a new city. It would be a legal nightmare, a media circus, his word against a fallen cop. Even with the movers as witnesses, the story could be twisted. An aggressive black man attacks a police officer. He had seen that story play out 1,000 times. It never ended well for the black man, no matter how justified his actions. There was a better way, a longer game. On your knees, Harlan growled, pressing the gun harder against Hale's skull. Get on your knees and put your hands behind your head, or I'll paint this perfect lawn with your brains. Hale looked into Harlan's eyes. He saw no reason, no control, only a man who had completely lost both, a man capable of pulling the trigger simply because his ego demanded it. Surrender was not an option. A physical fight was too risky. That left only one tactical choice: a temporary mission to secure a long-term victory. There's no need for this, Hale said, his voice still under perfect control, even with a pistol at his head. He slowly raised his hands, palms open, the universal signal of non-aggression. You wanted the fee? the $1,000 protection fee. You can have it." The offer seemed to surprise Harlan. It was the victory he had craved, yet he was so lost in his rage that he had not expected to achieve it so easily. He hesitated, the gun still pressed against Hale's temple. "You think you can buy your way out now?" he sneered, though the offer had clearly blunted his murderous momentum. "This isn't about buying my way out," Hale said, choosing each word with surgical precision. "It's about being a good neighbor. You were right. I was arrogant. I'm new here and I don't understand how things work. Let me correct my mistake." It was a strategic lie, a verbal maneuver designed to feed Harlan's fragile ego and hand him the victory he so desperately needed. It cost Hale nothing but words, and with those words he would gain everything. Harlan narrowed his eyes, searching for a trick, but Hale's expression was one of sincere, if reluctant, surrender. "Get it," Harlan ordered in a low growl. "No sudden moves." He stepped back half a pace but kept the weapon trained on Hale's chest. Hale nodded slowly. "It's in my wallet, in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it now, very slowly." He moved with deliberate, exaggerated caution, narrating every action. He reached behind him, and drew out a thick leather wallet and opened it. Methodically, he counted out 10 crisp $100 bills. The entire time he felt the imaginary hole the barrel of Harlan's pistol was burning into his sternum. He held out the money. "Here, $1,000 for the Community Protection Fund." Harlan's eyes flicked from the cash to Hale's face and back again. He snatched the bills from Hale's hand with sharp, aggressive movements and stuffed them quickly into his pocket. For a moment, he stood there breathing hard, weapon still raised. He had won. He had the money and the submission he craved. A petulant, triumphant smile slowly spread across his face. He had shown this new neighbor who was in charge. "See?" he said, finally lowering the Glock. "Was that so hard? You learned fast. I like that." He turned and walked away without another word, crossing the street as if he had just finished a casual conversation. Hale stood on his porch, $1,000 lighter, the imprint of the barrel still faintly visible on his skin. He watched Harlan until the man disappeared into his house. The cold, calculated calm he had felt earlier returned, but now it had been forged into something harder, sharper. This was not over. This was only the beginning. Officer Harlan believed he had closed a deal. In reality, he had just signed his own death warrant. When the front door of Officer Harlan's house clicked shut, the illusion of suburban peace settled back into place. The movers, who had been frozen like statues, began to move again with cautious glances toward Darius Hale. One of them, a heavy-set man with a kind face, stepped forward carefully. "Sir, are you all right? We saw everything. We can call the police." Hale raised a hand, stopping him. The irony of the suggestion was almost laughable. Call the police. The police had just left. "I'm fine," Hale said in a voice of calm that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "And I would appreciate it if you didn't call anyone just yet. Please continue your work. I'll handle this." The man hesitated, then nodded, clearly reassured by Hale's steady presence. He turned back to the truck, and the sounds of moving resumed, quieter than before. Hale stepped into his new, empty house. The smell of fresh paint and new carpet filled the air. This was supposed to be a place of peace, a home where he could finally relax after a lifetime of service. In less than 10 minutes, it had become a battlefield. But Hale was a man who felt at home on battlefields. He walked through these echoing rooms with sure, measured steps. He was not angry. Anger was a luxury, an emotion that clouded judgment and led to tactical errors. What he felt was pure, cold determination. A problem had presented itself, and now it would be systematically dismantled. He set aside his personal cell phone, which rested on a box labeled kitchen. In the room he had designated as his home office, from a reinforced Pelican case, one of the first items he had brought into the house. He removed a second phone. It was a plain black device, but it was an ST3, a secure communications unit with military-grade encryption. It had no social media apps, no games, no selfie camera. It had one purpose: to provide a secure link to the most powerful military organization on the planet. He scrolled through the pre-approved contact list and selected a single entry: Joint Staff Watch Officer, a 24-hour post manned by a senior officer in the National Military Command Center, the operational heart of the Pentagon. Calling this number was not a casual matter. He pressed the call button. The connection was almost instantaneous. Joint Staff Watch, Colonel Anderson speaking. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and fully attentive. "Colonel Anderson, this is Colonel Darius Hale," Hale said, matching the professional tone. "I need to report a direct threat against a senior officer and request initiation of a personal security protocol." There was a brief pause, followed by the soft sound of a keyboard. The watch officer would be pulling Hale's file instantly. His rank, current assignment, security clearance, and location. "Colonel Hale, sir." "Authenticated," Anderson replied, a new urgency in his voice. "Please advise on the nature of the threat." Hale stood at the large window of his new office, looking across the street at Officer Harlan's house. It appeared so ordinary, so peaceful. "I was approached at my primary residence by an individual identifying himself as Officer Wade Harlan of the Oak Haven Police Department. The officer was off duty but armed. He made several illegal demands which I refused. He then escalated the situation by drawing his service weapon, placing it against my head, and threatening my life. To de-escalate the immediate threat, I complied with his demand for a $1,000 cash payment. The officer has returned to his residence directly across from mine." The silence on the other end was profound. Colonel Anderson was likely absorbing the shocking absurdity of the report. A United States Army colonel, a man who advised generals and helped shape national security policy, had been held at gunpoint and extorted on his own lawn by a local police officer. "Sir, confirming you were extorted under threat of lethal force by a local law enforcement officer." "Correct," Colonel Hale said. "The subject is my next-door neighbor. He represents an ongoing and unpredictable security risk." "Understood, sir," Anderson said as the sound of his keyboard intensified. "Initiating Protocol 79. The Office of the Secretary of the Army will be notified immediately. Army Criminal Investigation Division will be engaged. A formal inquiry will be transmitted to the local governing body within the hour. Do you require an immediate security detachment at your location?" Hale considered for a moment. Protocol 79 was serious business, designed for situations in which high-ranking military personnel faced credible threats, whether from terrorists, foreign agents, or, in this case, a corrupt police officer. "Negative on the security team for now," Colonel Hale said. "I do not believe the subject knows who I am. I would prefer to maintain a low profile until an initial assessment can be completed. A visible military presence could compromise the investigation." "Understood, sir. Low profile. CID will likely dispatch a field team from the nearest base. Expect contact within 24 hours. We will handle all interagency communication from this end. Please maintain situational awareness and report any further contact with the subject immediately." "Will do," Hale said. "Hale out." He ended the call and set the secure phone on the desk. He looked out the window again. A curtain in Harlan's house shifted. He was being watched. Hale did not move. He simply stood there like a sentinel, silent. Harlan believed he held the power. He believed his badge and his gun made him the ultimate authority on the street. He had no idea what he had just awakened. He had stepped into a nest, completely unaware that the nest was the Pentagon, and the full weight of the United States Army was about to fall on his perfect, ordered world. The call had been made. Everything was in motion. For Officer Wade Harlan, the clock was ticking. Across the street, Wade Harlan pulled back the living room curtain and smiled with smug satisfaction. He could see his new neighbor standing at the window, a dark silhouette against the empty room, staring right at him. "Take a good look," he muttered. "You know who runs things now." He felt a wave of deep satisfaction, an intoxicating mix of power and vindication. The bills in his pocket were a trophy, a tangible symbol of his victory. He had confronted this arrogant newcomer, the supposed tough guy, and broken him, made him pay. It was the perfect start to the weekend. His partner, Officer Travis Cole, would be arriving any minute. They were supposed to head to a sports bar to watch the game. Harlan could hardly wait to tell the story. He would embellish it, of course, painting the new guy as some kind of bulky, aggressive thug who talked too much, acted suspicious, and practically begged for a beating. He, Officer Harlan, had shown remarkable restraint, calming the situation with a firm but professional hand. He would not mention the $1,000. That was his private bonus, a small tax on disrespect. The doorbell rang. It was Cole, a young, lanky officer who looked at Harlan with a mixture of awe and nervous admiration. "Hey, ready to go?" Cole asked as he stepped inside. "Almost," Harlan said, closing the door. "You're not going to believe the day I've had." He led Cole into the kitchen, pulled 2 beers from the refrigerator, and handed one to his partner. "So the new neighbor," Harlan began, leaning against the counter, "moved in this morning. Right away, my gut tells me something's off. Big guy with an attitude problem, wearing military surplus like he just walked off a battlefield." "Yeah, what did you do?" Cole asked, eyes wide. He loved Harlan's stories. They were always better than the boring reality of their daily patrols. "I did my job," Harlan said, taking a long pull from his beer. "Went over to introduce myself, as a neighbor and as law enforcement. The guy gets hostile right away, starts talking about his rights, asking if I'm on duty, the whole routine. Typical sovereign citizen type. It was clear he was trying to intimidate me." He paused for dramatic effect. "I think he might be setting up some kind of operation. The moving truck had heavy-duty military crates. He was nervous. Wouldn't tell me what was in them." Cole was completely captivated. "So what happened?" "He got aggressive," Harlan lied smoothly, warming to his fiction. "Started puffing up, getting in my face. I identified a clear threat. I was forced to draw my weapon to protect myself. I got him to calm down and explained that we don't tolerate that kind of behavior in Oak Creek. He backed down real quick once he saw I was serious." It was a masterpiece of fiction, casting himself as the heroic officer confronting a dangerous suspect. "You should write it up," Cole said, always diligent and always ready to buy the story just to cover himself. "If this guy causes trouble later, you'll already be on the record." Harlan had already considered that. It was standard procedure for abusers like him. Control the narrative, file the first report, frame the victim as the aggressor. Any later complaint would look like retaliation. "Already ahead of you," Harlan said with a confident smile. He led Cole into his small home office and sat down at the computer, logging into the department's remote reporting system. He began typing, reading his words aloud so Cole could hear. "Approximately this morning, I, Officer Harlan, contacted a new resident at 121 Hogwood Lane. The individual, a large African-American male, exhibited suspicious and aggressive behavior." He continued detailing the fictional confrontation, portraying Hale as a volatile, uncooperative subject who refused to answer basic questions. He described how Hale had used intimidating body language and verbally challenged his authority, forcing him to draw his weapon in self-defense. "I was careful to use the right keywords, the phrases internal affairs looked for to justify an officer's actions. The subject failed to comply. Fearing for my safety, I used the minimum force necessary to de-escalate the situation." He described the end of the encounter as Hale finally obeying verbal commands and retreating into his residence. "I made no mention of the gun to the head, the death threat, or the $1,000 extortion." According to the official version filed by Officer Harlan, he was a vigilant guardian who had professionally neutralized a potential threat to his community. He was the hero. "Perfect," Cole said, nodding with approval. "That'll shut him up if he tries to file a complaint." Harlan hit send. The report was now officially in the system, a digital fortress of lies built to protect him. He felt untouchable. He leaned back in the chair, feeling the crispness of the $100 bills in his pocket. He had the money, the story, and the system on his side. What could go wrong? He grabbed the keys from the counter. "All right, that's done," he said with a wide smile. "Let's go get some wings. I'm buying." As he walked out the door with his partner, laughing about his invented tale of heroism, he remained completely unaware of the silent, encrypted data packet that at that very moment was transmitting from the Pentagon to the office of the Oak Haven City Administrator, a formal request for all information regarding an incident involving Officer Wade Harlan and the resident of 121 Hogwood Lane. The system Harlan trusted so completely for his protection was about to be challenged by a system infinitely more powerful and thorough than he had ever imagined. In a secure, soundproofed office in the E-Ring of the Pentagon, General Mark Peterson, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army, read the summary report on his monitor for the third time. His jaw was clenched, knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the desk. A colonel, a man he himself had selected for a critical post in the G357 Operations Directorate, had been held at gunpoint by a local police officer in a quiet suburban town. It was outrageous. It was unacceptable. It was an insult not only to an outstanding officer, but to the uniform itself. "Get me the Judge Advocate General," he barked into his intercom. Moments later, the Army's top lawyer appeared on the secure video link. "Read the flash report on Colonel Darius Hale," General Peterson ordered. The lawyer's eyes scanned his own screen, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to disbelief and then to cold anger. "I see it, General," he said grimly. "Protocol 79 has been initiated. What are your orders?" General Peterson rose and began pacing his office. The 4 stars on his shoulders gleamed under the fluorescent lights. This is not some clandestine assault. This was an act of aggression against a senior military officer by an agent of a civilian government agency. It must be handled with surgical precision. I do not want a media circus. I want a discreet, thorough, and absolutely decisive response. "Understood, sir," the General Counsel replied. "We will begin with a formal, discreet inquiry from the Secretary of the Army's civilian office to the local city administrator. We will frame it as a routine request, citing the need to verify details of an interaction with a Department of Defense employee. We will not mention rank or the severity of the incident. We will simply request the officer's report and any related documentation. We will give them the opportunity to handle it correctly themselves." General Peterson nodded. It was the right first move. Give them enough rope and see if they hang themselves. Make clear that the request is urgent, with a 24-hour deadline, he added, and have the Department of Defense prepared. Tell them to ready a 2-man team from the nearest field office. Low profile, civilian clothes. I want them ready to move the moment we receive a response from the local authorities, or if we do not receive one. Within minutes, the plan was in motion. A civilian aide in the Secretary of the Army's office drafted a polite but firm email. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic subtlety. It mentioned a reported interaction, the need to ensure compliance with proper protocols, and a request for all reports filed by Officer Wade Harlan regarding the incident. The email was not sent to the police chief. It was sent to the city administrator, a subtle but significant decision. It elevated the matter above a simple police issue and placed it directly in the realm of municipal governance. It was a signal. We are not merely talking to your police. We are talking to the people who sign their paychecks. The email arrived in the inbox of Oak Haven City Administrator Stephen Price, a harried bureaucrat, on a quiet afternoon. He almost missed it, ready to pack up for the day, but the sender address caught his attention: Secretary of the Army, Pentagon. His heart skipped. The Pentagon did not send emails to small-town administrators on a weekend afternoon unless something was very wrong. He read the request, frowning in confusion. An incident involving Officer Harlan and a Department of Defense employee. He would have to talk to Chief Reynolds. He forwarded the email to the police chief with a simple 2-word message: "Handle this." Meanwhile, at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, 2 men received the call. They were special agents of the Army Criminal Investigation Division, CID. One was a seasoned veteran, Chief Warrant Officer David Chen, a man who had investigated everything from black market scams in Baghdad to espionage cases in Berlin. The other was a younger, sharp-eyed agent, Sergeant First Class Raphael Soto, a former military policeman with a gift for digital forensics. They were ordered to prepare a vehicle and pack a bag. The information was sparse: a potential threat against a senior officer in Oak Haven. Further details would be provided on a need-to-know basis. They asked no questions. They simply packed their bags, checked their equipment, and waited for the word. Back in Oak Creek Estates, Darius Hale continued methodically unpacking his life. He made his bed, organized his kitchen, arranged the books in his office. To any outside observer, he was simply a man moving into a new house. But his senses were on high alert. He noted every car that passed, every dog that barked. He observed that Harlan had left around midday in a large truck with another man. He noted the time, studied the companion's appearance. He was collecting data, building a pattern. He was in a state of patient, vigilant waiting. He had set the pieces in motion. He had absolute faith in the system he had served his entire life. He knew the wheels of military justice turned slowly, but they were inexorable, and they ground with extreme precision. The silent maneuver from the Pentagon was complete. The ball was now in Oak Haven's court. Their response would determine whether this situation would be resolved with a silent scalpel or a massive hammer. Police Chief Frank Reynolds was enjoying a late lunch at his favorite restaurant when his phone vibrated. It was the forwarded email from the city administrator. He squinted at the screen, irritation etched on his features. The Pentagon? What the hell did the Army want with one of his officers on a weekend? He scanned the message and his irritation transformed into defensive anger. An inquiry about Wade Harlan. Reynolds felt the immediate, instinctive need to protect his man. Harlan was one of his best. A little rough around the edges, sure, but proactive. He made good arrests. He kept the peace in the wealthy neighborhoods. And in a town like Oak Haven, that was what mattered. The affluent residents were the ones who called the mayor. They were the ones who funded the police budget. Problem? His wife asked from across the table. Just the city administrator getting worked up over nothing, Reynolds grumbled. Bureaucrats. He finished his burger, his mind already racing. This Department of Defense employee, whoever he was, had probably talked back to Harlan and gotten his feelings hurt. Now he was trying to throw his weight around, get his old bosses to fight his battles for him. It was pathetic. Reynolds had seen it before. People thought their fancy jobs in Washington gave them authority in the real world. He would show them. When he returned to the station, the skeleton Saturday crew was lounging around watching television. Reynolds went straight to his office and logged into his computer. He opened the incident reporting system and searched for Harlan's name. There it was, filed less than 2 hours earlier. He read Harlan's report. It was perfect, clear, concise, and professional. It painted a clear picture: a suspicious new resident, aggressive behavior, and an officer who had masterfully de-escalated the situation without making an arrest. Harlan had even used the phrase, "showed remarkable restraint." It was a textbook example. This was all he needed. The Department of Defense employee, this Hale character, had no case. It was his word against the detailed contemporaneous report of a sworn officer. A slam dunk. Reynolds opened a new email to the city administrator and drafted a response that was both respectful and completely dismissive. It projected an aura of competence and control, assuring all higher-ups that the Oak Haven Police Department had the situation firmly in hand. "Stephen," it began, "thank you for forwarding the inquiry from the Department of the Army. I have personally reviewed the matter in question. Officer Harlan, a 12-year veteran with an impeccable record, filed a thorough report on the incident. It appears Officer Harlan was conducting a routine community introduction with a new resident when the individual became inexplicably hostile and non-compliant." He continued, echoing the language of Harlan's fabricated report. The resident's aggressive posture and verbal threats created a situation in which Officer Harlan, fearing for his safety, was forced to assume a defensive posture. He handled the situation with the utmost professionalism and succeeded in de-escalating the incident without any physical altercation or arrest. From my perspective, this is a case of an exemplary officer fulfilling his duty to ensure the safety of our community. Tsee. He leaned back, rereading his words. It was good. It conveyed that he had personally investigated and found nothing wrong. It subtly painted the Department of Defense employee as the problem. He added a final sentence, a gesture of bureaucratic defiance. "Please assure the Department of the Army that the matter has been thoroughly investigated and is considered closed." I hit send. The email reached the city administrator, who, relieved that the problem had been handled so easily, immediately forwarded it to the original sender at the Pentagon. He was glad to be rid of the matter. The Oak Haven Police Department's response arrived in the secure inbox of the Secretary of the Army's office well within the 24-hour window. In his office, the Army General Counsel read the forwarded email. His face, which had been set in grim lines, slowly transformed into a cold, thin smile. It was more perfect than he could have hoped. The police chief had not merely ignored the warning. He had swallowed the bait completely. He had personally endorsed a fabricated report. He had declared the case closed without interviewing the complainant. He had committed himself and his entire department to Officer Harlan's lie. He had taken the rope the Pentagon had offered and fashioned it into a perfect noose. The general counsel picked up his secure phone. "General Peterson," he said, "we have their response. It is exactly what we wanted." The general's voice came over the line. "They chose the hammer. Send the CID team with immediate effect." The order was given. In Virginia, Chief Warrant Officer Chen and Sergeant Soto received a one-word text on their encrypted devices. "Proceed." They rose, grabbed their bags, and headed to their unmarked sedan. They had their destination, their target, and now they had their authorization. They were the scalpel, and they were about to make the first incision. The local response had been a fatal miscalculation. They believed they were closing a case. Instead, they had just opened the floodgates. Monday morning at the Oak Haven Police Department unfolded with ordinary routine. The air was thick with the strong smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. Officers laughed and traded weekend stories. Chief Reynolds sat in his office with his feet on the desk, feeling proud of himself. He had handled that Pentagon nonsense with speed and efficiency. He had not even bothered to call Harlan and worry him about nothing. He had protected his officer, defended the honor of his department, and put those Washington bureaucrats in their place. I was reading the sports page when his desk sergeant called. "Chief, there are two gentlemen here to see you. They say it's a federal matter." Reynolds dropped his feet from the desk, annoyed by the interruption. Federal matter. Probably FBI agents chasing a lead on some tax fraud case. "Send them in," he sighed. The door opened and two men entered. They were not what he expected. They lacked the arrogance of FBI agents. They wore simple business suits and moved with a calm discipline that was instantly unsettling. One was an older Asian man with eyes that seemed to see everything. The other was a younger Hispanic man, sharply dressed. They carried themselves like soldiers, not cops. "Chief Reynolds?" the older man asked. His voice was quiet and polite, yet carried an unmistakable hardness. "I'm Chief Warrant Officer David Chen, United States Army Criminal Investigation Command. This is my partner, Special Agent Rafael Soto." He displayed his credentials. Reynolds' blood ran cold. Army investigators, here in his station. His mind instantly recalled the Pentagon email. This could not be a coincidence. "I see," Reynolds stammered as his self-satisfaction evaporated like morning mist. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" "We're here regarding an incident that occurred involving one of your officers, Wade Harlan," Agent Soto said in a serious professional tone. "We have been tasked with conducting a preliminary investigation." Reynolds immediately went on the defensive. "Look, I already responded to the Army's inquiry. I personally reviewed the report. Officer Harlan acted professionally. The case is closed." Chief Chen offered a slight, almost imperceptible smile that did not reach his eyes. "We are aware of your response, Chief. That is why we are here. The Department of Defense has a different perspective on the matter. We will not be leaving until we have interviewed Officer Harlan." The statement was not a request. It was an order. The serene authority with which Chen spoke left no room for discussion. These men had not come to negotiate. Reynolds felt a growing dread. He had made a serious miscalculation. "Officer Harlan is on patrol," he said, buying time. He needed to call Harlan and warn him. "Then I suggest you call him back to the station," Soto said, pulling a small, high-end digital recorder from his pocket and placing it on the chief's desk. "We can conduct the interview in one of your interrogation rooms. We would also like to request access to Officer Harlan's complete personnel file, including all commendations and civilian complaints, as well as a copy of the department's use of force policy." The audacity of the request left Reynolds stunned. They were acting as if they owned the place. "Hold on a minute," he blustered, trying to reclaim some control. "You can't just walk in here and start demanding personnel files. There are procedures, protocols." Chief Chen raised a hand to silence him. "Chief Reynolds," he said, lowering his voice to nearly a whisper, which made it even more threatening, "we are operating under the authority of Title 10 of the United States Code, conducting an investigation into a credible threat against a senior United States military officer. We can obtain a federal warrant for those files in about 90 minutes. When that warrant arrives, it will be delivered by a team of U.S. Marshals, and this will become a much more public and unpleasant situation for you and your department. Or you can cooperate. The choice is yours." Reynolds stared at the two men. He saw no deception, no room for negotiation. He was completely outmatched. The mention of a federal warrant and U.S. Marshals sent a chill of fear through him. This was real. This was happening. "All right," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He felt like a man who had been checkmated in 3 moves. He picked up the radio. "Dispatch, have Officer Harlan and his partner return to the station immediately. Tell them it's a priority." Then he turned to his sergeant. "Davis, get Officer Harlan's personnel file. The whole thing." As the sergeant scurried to obey, Chen and Soto watched him in silence. They had not raised their voices. They had not made a single threat. Yet in 5 minutes, they had taken complete control of his station. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, the sports page forgotten. A sick feeling churned in his stomach. He had personally endorsed Harlan's report. He had told the Pentagon the case was closed, and now the Pentagon had sent its own investigators to his door. He had tied his fate to Wade Harlan's, and for the first time he began to wonder what had really happened on that quiet suburban street. He had the terrible feeling he was about to find out. Officer Wade Harlan and his partner Travis Cole were in the middle of a routine traffic stop when the radio call came. "Return to the station immediately. Priority." Harlan gripped his citation book tighter. A priority call usually meant a serious incident, yet dispatch sounded calm. It was unusual. "Wonder what that's about," Cole said from the passenger seat. "Probably the chief wants to give me another medal," Harlan joked, but a prickle of unease began to form in his stomach. It was just a feeling, a cop's intuition, but something did not feel right. When they entered the station, the atmosphere was palpably tense. The usual morning banter had vanished. Officers spoke in low voices, casting nervous glances toward Interrogation Room B. Chief Reynolds met them in the hallway, pale and sweating. "Harlan, my office. Now," he said in a tight voice. Inside the office, the chief closed the door. "What the hell happened the other day, Wade?" he asked in a rough whisper. "What do you mean?" Harlan asked, confused. "I filed my report. It's all in there." "Don't give me that," Reynolds hissed. "There are 2 Army CID investigators from the Pentagon sitting in that room. They're here about the guy you dealt with in Oak Creek." Harlan's blood froze. "Here? How is that possible? The guy must have a cousin who worked in some Pentagon office and pulled strings. Still, it was an overreaction." "Chief, it was nothing," Harlan said, trying to project calm. "The guy was a hothead. I calmed him down. End of story. It's all in the report." "Well, you'd better stick to that story," Reynolds warned, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Because they're waiting for you. Don't screw this up, Wade. You're not just representing yourself in there. You're representing this entire department." Harlan felt his old arrogance return. So what? A couple of military bureaucrats wanted to ask him a few questions. He had dealt with internal affairs detectives before. This would be easy. He straightened his uniform and walked toward the interrogation room. Cole followed nervously. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and sterile. The 2 investigators, Chen and Soto, sat at the metal table. They did not stand. "Officer Harlan," Chen said in a neutral voice, "thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." Harlan sat across from them, chest out. Cole sat in the corner, looking like a frightened student outside the principal's office. "I understand you have some questions about an incident," Harlan began, taking control. "I've already filed a detailed report, but I'm happy to walk you through it." "We've read your report, officer," Soto said without looking up from the file in front of him. "We just have a few clarifications. You stated that you initiated contact as part of a community introduction. Is that a common practice for you when you're off duty?" The question was simple, yet designed to probe the details of his story. "I take my community duty very seriously, on duty and off," Harlan said smoothly. "When I see something that looks out of place, I investigate." "And what specifically about Colonel Hale appeared out of place?" Chen asked quietly. The use of the rank hit Harlan like a physical blow. Colonel. They knew his rank. How? He had simply assumed the man was some enlisted soldier. His composure faltered for a fraction of a second. "I didn't know his rank at the time," he said quickly. "He was a large, unknown man in a neighborhood where he didn't seem to fit. His behavior was suspicious." "Your report indicates he became inexplicably hostile," Soto continued, eyes fixed on the paper. "Can you describe that hostility? What were his exact words?" Harlan hesitated. He could not remember the exact lies he had put in his report. He began adding more information. He got defensive right away, started yelling about his rights, getting in my face, said I had no right to be on his property. Interesting, Chen said, leaning slightly forward, because that is not what the witnesses recall. Witnesses? Harlan's voice cracked. What witnesses? The moving crew, Chen replied. We spoke with them this morning. Their version of events is different. They remember you demanding paperwork and money. They do not remember the homeowner yelling. The first crack appeared in Harlan's facade. He had forgotten about the movers. A rookie mistake. They're wrong, Harlan said, his voice rising a little. They were on the other side of the truck. They couldn't have heard everything clearly. Perhaps, Soto said. Let's talk about your weapon. You stated you drew it because you feared for your safety due to his intimidating body language. Colonel Hale is 6'4" and weighs 220 pounds. You are 5'11" and weigh 190. You were armed. He was not. Can you explain in detail the specific actions he took that made you fear for your life? Harlan was sweating. The questions were too precise. They were dismantling his story, not with accusations, but with quiet, surgical questions. He began to ramble, talking about training, proactive threat assessment, the way the colonel had clenched his fists. The more he talked, the more he contradicted himself. And finally, Officer, Chen said in a voice soft as silk, after de-escalating this terrifying situation, you and your partner, Officer Cole, went to a sports bar, correct? Harlan nodded, confused by the change of subject. And you paid for the food and drinks in cash, $123.54 to be exact. According to your bank records, you withdrew $0 the previous day. That's a lot of cash to be carrying. Can you explain where the extra money came from? The room fell silent. Harlan stared at Chen, his mind racing. Bank records? How did they have his bank records? They were military investigators, not the IRS. The trap had sprung. It was such a small, insignificant detail, yet it was a loose thread, and Chief Warrant Officer Chen was pulling it, ready to unravel everything. The carefully constructed fortress of lies Harlan had built was beginning to crumble around him. The question about the money hung in the air, dense and suffocating. Harlan's mind was a frantic whirl of denials and explanations. He could say it was money from his wife, a gift, anything. But he knew with chilling certainty that these men would already have checked. They would not have asked the question unless they already knew the answer. His gaze moved from Chen's impassive face to Soto's cold stare. These were not cops he could intimidate or outsmart. They were hunters, and he was their prey. I don't remember, he finally mumbled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was a weak, pathetic defense, and everyone in the room knew it. From the corner, Travis Cole shifted nervously. He had gone along with Harlan's story, nodding in the sports bar while his partner bragged. He had assumed it was just another of Harlan's tall tales. But now, seeing the sweat on Harlan's forehead and the predatory calm of the investigators, he realized this was something entirely different. This was serious. Chief Chen closed the file in front of him with a sharp snap. I think we're finished for now, Officer Harlan, he said. The interrogation was over. Harlan, stunned and shaken, stumbled out of the room, closely followed by Cole. The investigators did not move. What was that? Cole whispered frantically once they were in the hallway. How did they know all that? Shut up, Travis, Harlan hissed, looking around wildly. Just shut up and get back in the car. He needed to think. He needed to figure out what was happening. This Colonel Hale was more than some desk jockey. He had connections, powerful connections. For the first time, a genuine flicker of fear cut through Harlan's arrogance. Back in the interrogation room, Chief Reynolds burst in. What happened? What did you get out of him? Agent Soto looked up from his laptop. We got exactly what we needed, Chief, he said. We established a baseline of deception. At that moment, Chief Chen's secure phone vibrated. He answered, listened for a moment, and nodded. Understood, sir. We have it. He ended the call and looked at Reynolds. We just received authorization to share evidence with you, Chief. The complainant, Colonel Hale, was kind enough to provide it. Soto turned his laptop so it faced Reynolds. On the screen was a video file. Colonel Hale has a rather sophisticated residential security system, Soto explained. 4 independent 4K cameras covering his porch from multiple angles, all with high-fidelity audio recording. This is the recording from that morning. He pressed play. The video was incredibly clear, like watching a movie. Harlan strode across the street, radiating belligerence. The audio was crisp, capturing every condescending word, every illegal demand he made of Hale. Reynolds watched, his face draining of color with every second. He saw Hale's calm, firm refusals. He saw Harlan's growing fury. Then came the moment that turned his stomach. He watched in horror as his officer, his Wade Harlan, drew his weapon and pressed it against Colonel Hale's head. The audio captured the mover's gasps of terror. It captured Harlan's snarled threat. "Get on your knees, or I'll blow your head off. But." It was all there, undeniable, unambiguous. Reynolds felt nauseous. This was not one officer's word against a citizen's. This was broadcast-quality footage of a violent crime. But it got worse. The camera captured the entire extortion. Hale's calm offer of payment, Harlan's hesitation, then his greedy acceptance, the slow, deliberate counting of the $100 bills. The camera angle from above the door was so sharp, the serial numbers were almost readable. The recording continued, showing Harlan snatching the money, lowering the weapon, and walking away with a smirk of smug victory. Soto paused the video on a perfect close-up of that mocking smile. "This recording," Chief Chen said quietly, without emotion, "constitutes irrefutable evidence of multiple state and federal crimes. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, extortion under color of law, deprivation of civil rights, to name only a few." Chief Reynolds could not speak. He stared at the frozen image on the screen, the man he had defended, the officer whose impeccable record he had touted to the Pentagon, was a violent, corrupt criminal, and he had been recorded in humiliating detail. He remembered his own email to the city administrator, "Utmost professionalism. Exemplary officer." He had staked his credibility and his career on Harlan's lie, and this video had just obliterated that lie. "Colonel Hale's legal team will be sending a copy to the United States Attorney's Office," Soto added casually, as if discussing the weather, "along with your email response to the Department of the Army, which will likely be introduced as evidence in a subsequent investigation for obstruction and conspiracy." The threat was no longer veiled. They were telling him directly, "You are implicated in this. You are complicit." The room began to spin. Reynolds gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. The irrefutable proof was not only on the laptop screen, it was in the cold, hard stares of the two military investigators who now had him and his entire department in their sights. His world was collapsing. The next 48 hours were the longest of Chief Frank Reynolds' life. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. The CID investigators left quietly, taking the damning video with them and leaving Reynolds drowning in a toxic mix of fear and regret. He tried to call Wade Harlan to tell him about the video, but his calls went straight to voicemail. Harlan had taken the rest of the day off and was hiding. Reynolds was alone, adrift in a sea of trouble with no land in sight. On Wednesday morning, he received a formal summons. It was not from CID. It was from his own Internal Affairs Division, yet the language was chillingly unfamiliar. It was a mandatory administrative hearing regarding Officer Harlan. The summons also indicated that a representative from the United States Attorney's Office and the original complainant would be present. Reynolds felt the air leave his lungs. This was it. This was the formal beginning of the end. He ordered Harlan to report. This time Harlan answered the phone, his voice tight and frightened. They gathered in the department's largest conference room. Harlan sat there, gaunt and hollow-eyed. A cheap suit barely disguised his bulk and his panic. His union-appointed attorney sat beside him, a heavy-set man who already looked defeated. Reynolds presided at the head of the table alongside the head of Internal Affairs, a stern-faced captain who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. Everyone waited. Harlan kept casting nervous glances toward the door, expecting the two stone-faced CID agents to walk in. Exactly on time, the door opened, but it was not Chen and Soto. A woman in an elegant dark blue suit entered first, radiating an aura of firm federal authority. "Good morning," she said in a commanding voice. "I am Assistant United States Attorney Karen Ferris." She placed a heavy briefcase on the table with a solid thud. Behind her came the two CID agents, Chen and Soto. They flanked the door like sentinels. Then the final person entered. Wade Harlan's mouth fell open. It was him, the man from the house. But he was not wearing a military t-shirt and cargo pants. He wore the Class A service uniform of the United States Army. The dark blue jacket was impeccably tailored, adorned with a row of ribbons and medals that spoke of a long and distinguished career. On his shoulders rested the silver eagles of a full colonel. His nameplate read simply "Hail" in pure black lettering. He moved with a quiet dignity and strength that seemed to absorb all the air in the room. He sat directly across from Harlan, back straight as a rod, expressions serene and unreadable. The transformation was so complete, so shocking, that for a moment no one spoke. Harlan looked as if he had seen a ghost. This was not some soldier he had intimidated. This was a high-ranking officer. This was the real thing. The cheap suit Harlan wore suddenly felt like a clown costume. His union attorney swallowed hard, eyes wide with horror. He had come prepared to defend a police officer who had assaulted a disgruntled citizen, not one who had held a gun to the head of a full colonel. The situation had changed drastically. Chief Reynolds felt a fresh wave of despair. He had dismissed this man's complaint. He had labeled him hostile and non-compliant. He had trusted the word of a corrupt officer over that of a decorated military hero. The monumental stupidity of his actions was crushing. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ferris broke the silence. She opened her briefcase and set up a projector, aiming it at the blank white wall behind her. "We are here today to review the findings of a federal investigation into the conduct of Officer Wade Harlan," she began in a voice that cut through the tension. "However, before we review the evidence, I believe it is important that everyone in this room understands the full context of the incident." She yielded the floor to Colonel Hale. He rose slowly without looking at Harlan and addressed the room. "My name is Colonel Darius Hale," he said in the same calm, steady baritone Harlan remembered from the porch, now carrying the full weight of his rank and uniform. "I have served in the United States Army for 25 years. I am a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and of the Army War College. I have completed 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. My current assignment is at the Pentagon, where I serve as Director of Operations and Strategic Planning for the Army, G357. With every word, Harlan sank deeper into his chair. West Point, the Pentagon, combat deployments. The man he had called a ghetto rat trying to sneak into a fancy neighborhood was a senior strategist for the entire United States Army. The man from whom he had extorted $1,000 helped manage a multi-billion-dollar budget. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. "That morning," Colonel Hale continued, his voice as steady as a rifle's sights, "I was moving into my new home with my family when I was confronted by Officer Harlan. What followed was not a misunderstanding. It was a criminal act." Ferris dimmed the lights. The projector came to life, and the crisp 4K video of the assault filled the wall. The moment of truth had arrived. This was no longer merely a hearing. It was a military tribunal. And Officer Wade Harlan sat in the defendant's chair while his entire career, his entire life, was about to be judged and found guilty by the very man he had so grievously wronged. The video played in stunned silence. The high-definition images were even more devastating on the large wall, every detail magnified, every word echoing through the tense conference room, the condescending tone in Harlan's voice, the calm defiance in Hale's, the flash of sunlight on the barrel of the Glock, the pure, naked hatred in Harlan's eyes as he pressed it against the colonel's temple. It was a slow-motion car crash, and everyone was a horrified spectator. Harlan's union attorney stared at the screen with his mouth open. He had been prepared to argue probable cause and resisting arrest, not aggravated assault and armed extortion captured on video. He had brought a knife to a nuclear war. When the video ended on the close-up of Harlan's petulant smile, Ferris turned the lights back on. The silence that followed was dense and accusatory. Harlan refused to lift his eyes from the table. His face was a mess of blotches and sweat. "As you can see," Ferris said in a cold, serious voice, "the evidence of the criminal acts committed that day is unequivocal. However, our investigation did not stop there. We were curious whether this was an isolated incident, a single lapse in an otherwise exemplary career, as Chief Reynolds suggested in his official correspondence." She directed a scathing, dismissive look at the chief. Reynolds felt himself shrink under her gaze. "So we dug deeper," Ferris continued, pulling a thick folder from her briefcase and dropping it onto the table with a heavy thud. We requested Officer Harlan's complete, unredacted personnel file, including the sealed records of civilian complaints the department does not typically release. She opened the folder. What we found was not a lapse. What we found was a pattern. She began reading in a flat, uninflected tone. Complaint filed several years ago. Mr. David Chen, software engineer, alleged that during a traffic stop, Officer Harlan directed a racial slur at him and threatened to send him back to his country when he asked why he had been stopped. Department finding, unfounded. Complaint filed 2 years later. Dr. Elena Soto, pediatrician, alleged that Officer Harlan illegally searched her vehicle, damaging the interior after stopping her for a broken taillight. She stated he verbally assaulted her and appeared to target her for being Hispanic. Department finding, unfounded. Page after page, she read a litany of abuse, a secret history of terror the department had systematically buried. There were 23 formal complaints over 12 years, 16 of them from people of color, all dismissed, all deemed unfounded. "Are you noticing the pattern, Chief Reynolds?" Ferris asked without looking up. "A pattern of harassment of minorities, a pattern of verbal abuse and illegal searches, and a pattern of this department systematically ignoring every warning sign." She looked directly at Harlan. "But it gets worse. We cross-referenced these complaints with Officer Harlan's arrest records. In more than 60% of his arrests involving minority suspects, his reports use eerily similar language. Subject became aggressive. I feared for my safety. Failed to comply." The same script he tried to use to frame a United States Army colonel. The union attorney finally spoke, his voice weak. "Those complaints were investigated and dismissed. They are inadmissible." "They may be inadmissible in a criminal trial," Ferris cut him off sharply. "But this is an administrative hearing, and they are absolutely admissible as evidence of a chronic, disqualifying pattern of conduct. More importantly, several of these complainants, upon learning that a federal investigation was underway, have agreed to testify under oath about their experiences. Their unfounded claims are about to become federal sworn testimony." Harlan's head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. Testify against him. His carefully constructed wall of impunity was being dismantled brick by brick. "This is a witch hunt," he blurted, voice cracking. "You're using your power, your rank, to go after me." Colonel Hale, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His words carried the force of absolute authority. "Officer Harlan," he said, his gaze fixed on the terrified policeman, "the only power I am using today is the power of the truth. You assaulted me. You threatened my life. You extorted me. And you did it because you looked at me and did not see a citizen or a homeowner or a soldier. You saw a target for your intolerance. You assumed I had no power. That was your mistake. And now the system you so clearly abused for 12 years is finally going to hold you accountable." The words landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Ferris closed the thick folder. Based on the irrefutable video evidence and this extensive history of misconduct, the United States Attorney's Office recommends the immediate termination of Officer Harlan for gross misconduct and multiple serious offenses. Additionally, we will present this entire case to a federal grand jury next week. The collapse was total. It was not merely the end of a career. It was a life built on foundations of lies and abuse collapsing in on itself. And neither the horses nor the men of the Oak Haven Police Department could put it back together. The mention of a federal grand jury drained the last of the strength from Harlan's union attorney. His shoulders sagged. This was no longer about saving a job. It was about keeping his client out of a federal penitentiary. The air in the room was thick with the stench of Harlan's ruined career, but Assistant U.S. Attorney Ferris was not finished. She had one more piece to move on the board. She shifted her attention from Harlan to the corner of the room where Officer Travis Cole had been trying to make himself invisible for the past hour. "Officer Cole," Ferris said in a suddenly familiar tone. Cole flinched as if he had been hit with a taser. Every eye in the room turned toward him. "You were Officer Harlan's partner. You were with him after the incident. You were also present during our initial interview with him." "Yes, ma'am," Cole stammered, face pale. He was a young officer with only 3 years on the force. He had idolized Harlan, seeing him as the kind of tough, street-smart cop he wanted to become. Now he was looking at a desperate, cornered criminal. And you heard Officer Harlan's account of the events both that day and during the interview, Ferris continued. You heard him say that Colonel Hale was aggressive, that he feared for his safety. You said nothing to contradict his version. Is that correct? Cole swallowed hard. He felt the trap closing around him. He looked at Harlan, who shot him a desperate, pleading glance. Then he looked at the cold, relentless face of the federal prosecutor. I wasn't present at the incident, he stammered, trying to find solid ground. I only know what Wade told me. But you were present in the interrogation room, Ferris pressed relentlessly. While federal agents questioned him, you sat in silence while he repeated his fabricated story, a story we can now prove beyond any doubt was a lie. Officer Cole, that is called making a false statement to a federal agent. It is a felony. It carries a penalty of up to 5 years in prison. The words hit Cole like a physical blow. Years in prison. His mind reeled. He had only been trying to be a loyal partner, to back up his senior officer. He had not realized he was committing a federal crime. Furthermore, Ferris continued in an icy voice, your silence could be interpreted as participation in a conspiracy to obstruct justice. That is another felony. We have your statement from the bar, recounted by the bartender who overheard you laughing while Harlan told his heroic and completely fictional story. You actively participated in perpetuating the cover-up. Cole began to tremble. This was a nightmare. He looked at Harlan again, but this time he did not see a hero. He saw a man who had dragged him into a pit of lies, a man willing to throw him under the bus to save his own skin. Harlan had never mentioned the gun. He had never mentioned the money. He had lied to him, to his own partner. The loyalty Cole had felt evaporated, replaced by the cold, primal instinct of survival. However, Ferris said, softening her tone slightly, the United States Attorney's Office is often willing to consider cooperation. We understand that junior officers can find themselves under pressure from more senior partners. We are prepared to offer you a deal, Officer Cole, here and now. She paused to let the offer sink in. Tell us everything you know, the truth about what Harlan told you that day. Any other instances of misconduct you have witnessed. Cooperate fully with our investigation, and the federal charges against you will be dropped. It was a lifeline, a desperate escape hatch after a plane crash. Cole's eyes filled with tears. He looked at his partner, the man he had admired, and saw nothing but his own future flashing before his eyes. A cell, a lost career, a ruined life. The choice was brutal but simple. It was Harlan's future or his own. He bragged about it, Cole blurted, the words tumbling out. At the bar, he said he taught the new N-word a lesson. He laughed about how scared the guy looked when he pulled his gun. He showed me the money, called it a ghetto tax. A collective gasp swept the room. The casual, vicious racism of the statement, now laid bare, was even more shocking than the video. Harlan's head snapped up. Travis, what are you doing? Shut up! He shouted in a raw voice, a cry of betrayal. But Cole could not stop. The dam had broken. He does it all the time, Cole sobbed, tears streaming down his face. He calls it collecting taxes from the neighbors. He targets people he thinks won't complain. Once he took a whole case of expensive liquor from a store owner after threatening him with health code violations. He told me it was a perk of the job. He said the chief had his back, that as long as the rich neighborhoods were happy, nobody cared what he did on the other side of town. With every word, Cole was not only condemning Harlan, he was exposing the corrupt core of the entire department. He was confirming the pattern the complaints had only hinted at. He was giving the federal prosecutor the witness she needed to turn a single assault case into a sweeping indictment of systemic corruption. Harlan lunged across the table, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "You traitorous worm!" he roared. Chief Chen and Agent Soto moved like lightning, intercepting him and slamming him back into his chair. The betrayal was total. The last shred of support Harlan had left had evaporated. It had turned against him in a desperate bid for survival. He was completely and irrevocably alone. The chaotic scene in the conference room was the final nail in the coffin. Officer Harlan's violent outburst, combined with Cole's detailed, tearful confession, had transformed the hearing into a formal indictment. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ferris remained calm amid the wreckage. Her expression was grim but satisfied. She had everything she needed. "Chief Reynolds," she said, her voice cutting through Harlan's fury, "in light of Officer Cole's testimony, which corroborates a pattern of criminal activity and implicates your department in a systematic cover-up. The United States Attorney's Office is officially initiating a comprehensive investigation into the Oak Haven Police Department for civil rights violations. Chief Reynolds' face went white. This was his worst nightmare. He realized it was no longer just about Harlan. His entire department, his entire career, was now under the federal microscope. "You can't do that," he whispered, the words sounding hollow even to himself. "Of course I can," Ferris replied coldly. "And I am. Effective immediately. You are officially suspended from your duties pending the outcome of our investigation. The Department of Justice will seek federal oversight of this department by the end of the week." Then she directed her attention to the man still being restrained by the two federal agents. "Wade Harlan," she announced in an authoritative voice. She pulled a folded document from her briefcase. "This is an arrest warrant signed by a federal judge less than an hour ago." She handed the warrant to Chief Chen. Two U.S. Marshals who had been waiting discreetly in the hallway entered the room. They were imposing figures in tactical vests. Their presence was an immediate and overwhelming symbol of federal power. The local authority of the Oak Haven Police Department had just been rendered completely irrelevant inside its own headquarters. The marshals approached the table, pulled a stunned and defeated Harlan from his chair, and spun him around. They secured his arms behind his back with expert efficiency. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed through the silent room. It was a sound Harlan had created thousands of times, a sound he associated with his own power over others. Now it was the sound of his own condemnation. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, extortion under color of law, deprivation of civil rights, and perjury," one of the marshals recited in a monotone. "You have the right to remain silent." Harlan did not appear to hear him. He stared, eyes wide, at Colonel Darius Hale. The colonel had not moved. He simply sat observing with a stoic, unreadable expression, a silent witness to the justice he had set in motion. To Harlan, it seemed as if the man had transformed into an avenging angel, a symbol of a power so incomprehensible to him that it might as well have been supernatural. "You," Harlan said in a hoarse voice, "you did this." Colonel Hale finally answered in a low, steady voice. "No, Officer Harlan, you did this to yourself. You made a choice that morning. You chose to be a bully. You chose to be a criminal. All I did was ensure that, for the first time in your career, your decisions had consequences." The marshals led Harlan from the room, now limp, shuffling across the floor. His union attorney remained seated, staring at the empty chair like a man whose case had evaporated before his eyes. Ferris began packing her briefcase. Her work was finished. She nodded to Colonel Hale. "We will be in touch regarding your grand jury testimony, Colonel. Thank you for your service, both overseas and here." "Thank you for your efficiency, Counselor," Hale replied with a slight nod. Chief Reynolds, or rather, the suspended Chief Reynolds, sat slumped at the head of the table, destroyed. He watched as the federal agents, the prosecutor, the CID investigators, and the U.S. Marshals left the room like a conquering army abandoning captured territory. His department no longer belonged to him. He had allowed a cancerous officer to grow unchecked, and now the entire body was paying the price. He had protected the abuser, and in doing so, he had become an accomplice to his crimes. Colonel Hale was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked at Reynolds. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a somber sense of duty fulfilled. "Chief," he said in a voice that carried no malice, only profound disappointment, "your primary responsibility is to your officers, but your ultimate duty is to the law. You forgot that. You protected the man, and in doing so, you betrayed the badge. I hope your replacement remembers the difference." Then he turned and walked out, leaving the suspended chief alone in the conference room, contemplating the ruins of his department. The full weight of federal justice had fallen on Oak Haven, and the consequences would be felt for a long time. Months later, Wade Harlan stood before a federal judge, a different man from the arrogant bully who had once terrorized his own neighborhood. He had exchanged his police uniform for an orange jumpsuit that was too small. The arrogant smile was gone, replaced by a permanent expression of fear. His trial had been swift and brutal, with the high-definition video evidence and the devastating testimony of his former partner, Travis Cole. The jury had taken less than an hour to find him guilty on all counts. Today was his sentencing. The courtroom was packed. In the gallery sat several of the people who had filed complaints against Harlan over the years, Mr. Chen, Dr. Soto, and others. They were there to witness the final act, to see the man who had been protected by the system for so long finally held accountable. Colonel Darius Hale was also there, seated in the front row in a simple dark suit. He was not there as a victim seeking revenge, but as a citizen, a witness to the culmination of the judicial process. The judge, a formidable and no-nonsense woman named Elia Norcross, looked down from the bench at the fallen former officer. Her expression was one of profound disgust. "Mr. Harlan," she began, her voice resonating through the silent courtroom, "you appear before this court convicted of heinous crimes, but your indictment is not merely a list of statutes you have violated. It is a testimony to a profound and repulsive betrayal of the public trust." She paused, scanning the faces in the gallery. A police badge is not a license to intimidate. It is not a shield for intolerance. It is supposed to be a symbol of protection, a promise to the community that its bearer will serve and protect all citizens equally, regardless of race, social standing, or the neighborhood in which they live. You, sir, have mocked that promise. Harlan's attorney had asked for leniency, citing his years of service and his family. Judge Norcross was unmoved. "Your counsel speaks of your 12 years on the force as if they were a mitigating circumstance," she continued, raising her voice with indignation. "But this court sees those 12 years differently. We see 12 years of abuse of authority, 12 years of terrorizing the very people you swore to protect, 12 years of hiding your criminal behavior behind a badge in a corrupt system that looked the other way." She looked directly at Harlan, who refused to meet her eyes. "Your greatest error, Mr. Harlan, was not merely your criminality, but your arrogance. You believed yourself untouchable. You assaulted a man on his own property. You threatened his life. You extorted him. And your first instinct was to file a report blaming the victim. You were so certain of your impunity that you committed perjury in a sworn statement without a second thought." She pointed toward Colonel Hale. "You did not know you were assaulting a senior military officer. But that, Mr. Harlan, is irrelevant. It should not matter whether the victim is a colonel or a carpenter, a doctor or a dishwasher. The crime is the same. The violation is the same. Your sin was judging a man by the color of his skin and the style of his shirt, and deciding he did not deserve the rights you swore to uphold. You saw a black man in a wealthy neighborhood and assumed he was the criminal. It turns out, Mr. Harlan, that the only criminal on that porch that day was you." The words were a brutal public vivisection of Harlan's character. He began to cry silently, shoulders shaking. "This court has heard the testimony not only of Colonel Hale, but of your former partner and of other citizens who had the misfortune of crossing your path," Judge Norcross continued. "We have heard the story of a man intoxicated by a small measure of power, a man who used his badge as a weapon to feed his fragile ego. You were not a peace officer, Mr. Harlan. You were a predator." She took up her gavel. The courtroom held its breath. "The sentence for these crimes must reflect their gravity. It must send a message to this community and to every law enforcement officer in this nation that such behavior will not be tolerated. There is no place in a just society for people like you." The gavel hung in the air. "Therefore, for the crime of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison. For the crime of extortion, I sentence you to 10 years. For the crime of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, I sentence you to 5 years. For the crime of perjury, I sentence you to 5 years. She paused to let the numbers settle. Under the federal sentencing guidelines, some of these sentences may run concurrently. After carefully considering the totality of your conduct, this court sentences you, Wade Harlan, to a total of 8 years and 6 months in a federal correctional facility. There will be no possibility of parole." The gavel fell with a sharp, final crack. It was over. A murmur swept the gallery, a collective sigh of relief and vindication. Wade Harlan collapsed into his chair, sobbing, destroyed. Justice, long delayed for his many victims, had finally arrived, and its verdict was scathing, just, and absolute. 6 months after the sentencing, the quiet, tree-lined streets of Oak Creek Estates looked much the same. Yet the foundations of the community and the town to which it belonged had been irrevocably altered. Wade Harlan was now only a number in the federal prison system, stripped of his badge, his pension, and his freedom. His house across from Colonel Hale's had been sold in a hurry. The for sale sign had been a lingering symbol of the rot that had been excised from the neighborhood. The fall of one corrupt officer had triggered a cascade of systemic change. The federal investigation into the Oak Haven Police Department had been as brutal and thorough as promised. The Department of Justice had imposed a federal consent decree, a set of radical reforms that placed the department under strict federal oversight. Chief Reynolds had been forced into early retirement, his career ending in disgrace. A new chief, a reformer from a larger, more diverse city, had been appointed with a mandate to cleanse the institution. The so-called unfounded complaints against Harlan had been reopened, resulting in civil settlements for the victims paid directly from the police department's budget. The message was clear. Abuse would now carry a tangible financial cost. For Colonel Darius Hale, life had settled into a new rhythm of peace. His family had joined him, and the house was no longer a sterile crime scene, but a warm, vibrant home. He had become a quiet, respected figure in the neighborhood. People waved when he ran in the mornings, not out of fear or deference to a rank he never mentioned, but out of simple, genuine neighborliness. Ironically, the incident had broken the ice. It had forced the insulated community to confront an ugly truth about itself and about the man they had trusted to protect them. One sunny afternoon, nearly a year after the incident, Colonel Hale sat on his porch reading a book. He looked up as a moving truck, very much like the one that had brought him there, rumbled down the street and stopped in the driveway of a house 2 doors down. A young family climbed out, a husband and wife, both doctors, and their 2 small children. They were black. A week later, another family of Indian descent moved into the house Harlan had once owned. The neighborhood was changing, becoming a more accurate reflection of the country of which it was a part. The invisible walls Harlan had tried so violently to control had crumbled. Hale watched the new family with quiet satisfaction. His stand had not been only for himself. It had been for them, for every person who had ever felt marginalized. He had demonstrated that the law, when applied with courage and integrity, can be a shield for the innocent, not merely a club for the powerful. His actions had created a space where others could now feel safe. The new police chief had sought him out early on, not as a complainant, but as a consultant. Together, they had helped implement new training programs focused on de-escalation, implicit bias, and constitutional rights. The Oak Haven Police Department was on a long road to redemption, but for the first time in a long while, it was headed in the right direction. Travis Cole, the young officer who had testified against Harlan, had been given a second chance. He remained on the force, humbled and transformed by the experience, a constant reminder to other officers of the price of silence and the courage of truth. The story had become a quiet legend in military legal circles, a case study taught at the Judge Advocate General School on civil military relations and the proper response to official misconduct. But for Hale, it was simpler. It was about keeping the oath he had sworn as a young man at West Point, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I had never imagined that one of those enemies would be his next-door neighbor wearing a police uniform. As the sun set, casting long shadows across his now peaceful lawn, he felt a deep gratitude. He had faced the test and had not wavered. Justice had been done. A community was healing. And a new, more hopeful dawn was breaking over Oak Creek. The story of Officer Wade Harlan and Colonel Darius Hale is, at its core, a study in the psychology of power. Harlan's actions did not spring from nowhere. They were the rotten fruit of a tree whose roots were nourished by insecurity and a desperate need for validation. For a man like Harlan, a badge is not a tool of service. It is a mask for incompetence. He saw the world as a hierarchy, and his greatest fear was standing on the bottom rung. By terrorizing those he perceived as weaker, minorities, people from poorer neighborhoods, he could create an illusion of his own strength and importance. Colonel Hale, a man of genuine achievement and quiet confidence, represented everything Harlan secretly feared he was not. Hale's presence in his neighborhood was not merely an intrusion, it was a personal affront to Harlan's fragile sense of order and self-worth. His violent reaction was not solely about racism. It was a desperate, panic-driven attempt to reassert dominance over a man whose very existence challenged his own. What would have happened if Colonel Hale had responded differently? If he had met Harlan's aggression with aggression of his own? The outcome could have been tragic. Harlan, armed and enraged, might have pulled the trigger, and the narrative would have been twisted into the story of a heroic officer forced to defend himself against an aggressive suspect. If Hale had not installed a state-of-the-art security system, everything would have dissolved into a chaotic he said, she said, in which the word of a decorated colonel would have confronted the deeply entrenched institutional bias that favors law enforcement. His victory rested not on fists or fury, but on discipline, strategy, and an unshakable faith in the very system Harlan sought to corrupt. He used his opponent's arrogance as a weapon against him, allowing Harlan to build his own gallows before calmly handing him the rope. The story serves as a powerful reminder that the true antidote to tyranny, whether on a grand scale or on a suburban street, is not merely anger, but accountability. It is the quiet courage to say no, the wisdom to document everything, and the faith to trust that while the arc of the moral universe is long, it does indeed bend toward justice. It reminds us that bullies, at their core, are cowards, and their power fades under the bright, relentless light of the truth. What do you think was Officer Harlan's greatest mistake? At what point in the story did you know he would get what he deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments.